Hi Brian, this is Rodney. Scoring your paper on Tuesday, June 19th, 2 days after you've turned it in. I'll send this video to you and you can use it to edit it and consider why you received the score you did, but then also if this is the paper that you select for your final draft, you'll have some really clear guidance as to what can be improved. We care about all of the pieces on the SPS writing rubric, including first readability here on the right, the statement of your thesis. But this one is the most important. This is the support, analysis, and critical thinking. And that's when I'll really try to figure out if the argument you give is valid, sound, if you have a clear argument, if you know which argument it means. I'm also going to use this pointer tool to make notes, so as I speak you will also see visually what I'm talking about. For example, here you need to indent all paragraphs, which is just typical grammar stuff. Another grammar mistake there. This view of has continue. Religion leader. Another grammar mistake. Around the global. That's confusing to me. So there's 3 significant grammar mistakes right there at the beginning of the paper, which means your readability is going to be relatively low. It is within us as individuals to possess, know what is morally right or wrong. I'm not sure what you're trying to say there. I suppose you're probably trying to say it is within us as individuals to know what is morally right or wrong. Again, this sentence doesn't make sense. It is the choices we make that determine whether our action is morally good, will overpower the nature of what is bad. I'm not sure what that means. So I already know that the readability at this point is going to score quite low. There are reoccurring problems with grammar, spelling, and punctuation, and they interfere with my ability to understand the line of reasoning for sure. I'm going to score it a 1, even though the poor sounds like the more apt description. I have difficulty understanding your sentences when reading it. Actually, I'm reading at a slower than normal pace. And I am consistently rereading passages. That's true. Much of this is also distracting. That's true. If I see that either the readability improves or gets worse, I'll come back and rescore that. So as I continue to read here, I'm going to minimize. Nope, I'm not. Now I'm going to consider the thesis. So I'm looking for your point. I will assume that this is probably your thesis. Your thesis is probably that you think society formulates what is good or bad, and that you think evil is a learned trait. And this concerns me right away because while I appreciate your ideas on what you think society, the influence society has on our morality, that is not the topic that you chose to consider. You chose to consider whether or not the divine command theory is a valid theory in explaining morality. So I would have expected you to have a thesis that argued something like this. the divine command theory is a valid theory in explaining morality because of X, Y, or Z. Or the divine command theory is invalid because of X, Y, or Z. That would have been a very reasonable thesis, and that makes me think that your thesis is not meeting the criteria for the assignment. Here is another issue with paragraphing. You need to indent. So this section here, so I'm not quite sure, Brian, what you're arguing for so far. Remember, you only have 600 to 900 words, so you need to get to the point really, really quick. And I can already tell that here at the beginning, you have a brief section on the divine command theory, which is what I would have expected. But then you begin to talk about why society contributes to what is good or bad. And then you begin to talk about virtue and religion down here, each of which is unrelated to the next. So honestly, at this point, I am unsure about what is going to follow and how any of this is going to relate to the divine command theory. I would have expected you to, by now, since I'm already, a paragraph and a half into the paper, I would have expected you to fully explain what the divine command theory is to me and why it is relevant to people considering what is right and wrong. So at this point, we are now talking about what Socrates said to Euthyphro, which is relevant, yes. Perhaps this should have been some of the very first sort of thing that you would have included in the paper. Please capitalize Bible, a proper noun. And I'm also now questioning whether or not this is actually your thesis. Because if this is your thesis, the entire paper would have been about this. But it is quite clear here that your first question, which is what you say here, has nothing to do with society formulating what is morally right or wrong. So in that sense, I do not know what your thesis is. And so you do not present a clear and engaging objective purpose or thesis that I can identify because I'm not quite sure. Your thesis is not appropriate to the assignment, which means that we will certainly be in the average section here. It is a questionable objective because it does not connect to the assignment. It's not clear or pertaining to the purpose of the paper, yes, but it is an appropriate place. It is right near the beginning, at the end of the first paragraph, so that seems to be the best score for that. So now you get to talking about the Bible. Abraham would have followed through his sacrifice of his son. So again, your readability score is going to be low. You wouldn't say, then would it be right? You would say, then it would be right to kill your son. Unless it's a question, which you do not have a question mark, so it would not be. I can tell right here that you are thinking about the necessary issues surrounding the divine command theory because you have brought up an issue, Abraham being commanded by God to sacrifice his son, that would be troubling to anyone who thinks that murder is always bad, even if God commands it. However, so that's good. However, you have not connected it to, very clearly, to whether or not you think the divine command theory is a moral theory, or is a valid moral theory. So what I'm looking for here, Brian, is an argument, and I haven't seen one yet. It appears to me as if you're giving me an example that would be a part of an important argument. So this is a really, really good point, but I do not see it in the context of a bigger argument, one with premises and one with conclusions. So it appears as if you should probably have another break here because you're now hitting a second point. He knew is Saul. What does that mean? And again, another readability issue. This is the first time in the paper, and we're now, what, 2/3 of the way into the paper, that you have told me something close to an answer to the divine command theory assignment. That is good. I'm glad you think you know what is right or what's true about the divine command theory. It must be earlier in the paper, it must be clearly stated, and it must be in the context of an argument. These examples must be in the context of an argument. I'm not sure what our university concept is. I'm not sure what this is. A man's law based on dogmatic beliefs. I also appreciate right here you wrestling with what you perceive to be an anti-religion argument, even though you yourself are religious. That is good that you see that. If that is a concern for you, then you need to address that clearly in the context of the argument. And it could be the case that in a longer paper, perhaps if you revise this for your final exam or for your final paper, that could be part of your argument and part of your response. Is it faithful, religiously faithful and reasonable to think the divine command theory is true? And if it is not, what can a religious person do? I'm not sure what this means here, being able to unleash our talents of service. Okay, I'm going to finish scoring the paper. And as I do, I'll continue to narrate. I can tell already that your argument is poor. You do not have premises, you do not have conclusions, you do not give reasons why your premises are true, and you do not explain whether or not your argument is valid and sound. You do use some evidence and examples, and there is certain ambiguity. I'm uncertain as to why they pertain to your goal, which again, I'm not quite sure what your thesis is, but I'm making assumptions here. There are a few sections in your paper, many sections in your paper, in which more evidence or examples are needed. There are no sources in this, so that is not a big deal. It appears to me as if you are certainly here, although I'm inclined to maybe score you a 3 because the reader has plenty of difficulty throughout the paper understanding how the evidence or examples support the thesis or objective. Now, lucky you, I cannot score a 3 because we're using the rubric, so you actually are getting an extra point there, and I'll write that here. Does your language and tone give evidence that you are showing or that you're speaking about philosophy? It's okay. It's certainly not above average. I'm not sure why the rubric speaks in this way, but I don't think that the arguments that you give